Whispers in the training ground. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Zara al-Rashid adjusted her gear with methodical precision. Around her, the other recruits moved with the boisterous energy of youth eager to prove themselves. Their conversations filled with bravado and competition, each trying to outdo the other with tales of their previous accomplishments. Zara remained silent, checking her equipment one final time before the day's exercises began. Her movements were economical, practiced, but she drew no attention to them. This was her third week at the academy, having joined the program 6 weeks after the others had already established their rhythm and relationships. "Look at her," whispered Tariq, a former military police officer whose swagger had earned him informal leadership among the recruits. "Still acting like she's handling explosives just to tie her boots." His comment drew quiet chuckles from several nearby trainees. Zara heard them but didn't react, continuing her preparations with the same careful attention to detail that had marked every action since her arrival. Instructor Khalil Mansour observed from across the yard, his weathered face showing increasing frustration. At 42, he had trained hundreds of operatives, and something about this woman's approach bothered him. Her technique was flawless, but she held back, never pushing beyond what was absolutely necessary. In his experience, elite operatives needed fire, aggression, the willingness to take risks. "Al-Rashid," he called out sharply, "you're treating this like a meditation retreat, not tactical training. When are you going to show us what you're really made of?" Zura looked up, meeting his gaze with steady brown eyes. "I'm here to learn, Instructor Mansour," she replied quietly. "Not to perform." Her response only deepened his irritation. The other recruits exchanged glances, some smirking at what they perceived as either fear or arrogance. They couldn't decide which was worse. As they moved into formation for the day's drills, Zura took her position at the back of the group. Her presence was like a whisper in a room full of shouts, barely noticed but somehow significant. She executed every movement with precision that spoke of extensive training, yet she never volunteered for leadership roles or attempted to showcase advanced skills. "She doesn't belong here," muttered Layla, a former intelligence analyst who had quickly established herself among the top performers. "Either she's too scared to really engage, or she thinks she's better than the rest of us." The whispers followed Zura through obstacle courses, weapons training, and tactical scenarios. Each day, she performed competently but never spectacularly, maintaining the same measured approach that frustrated instructors and puzzled fellow recruits. What none of them could see was the weight she carried, not of inadequacy or fear, but of profound loss and unwavering purpose. Every careful movement honored a memory, every restrained response reflected lessons learned in love and forged in grief. As the sun set on another day of training, Zura cleaned her equipment with the same ritual precision, preparing for tomorrow while carrying the invisible burden of yesterday. Echoes of the past 3 years earlier, the same training grounds had echoed with different voices, different dreams. Zura had been Lieutenant Zara al-Rashid then, part of an elite reconnaissance unit, and the man beside her had been everything she aspired to become. Omar Faisal moved through combat drills like poetry in motion, fluid, purposeful, never wasted. Unlike the other senior operatives who barked orders or showed off their skills, Omar taught through quiet demonstration and patient correction. "Watch the target, not your weapon," he had whispered during their first training session together. His hand had briefly covered hers on the rifle grip, steadying her aim. "Let your breathing tell you when to fire." Their relationship had grown in the spaces between training exercises, in shared meals where conversation flowed as naturally as breathing. Omar never spoke of his decorations or successful missions. Instead, he talked about his sister's wedding preparations, his mother's garden, the small mercies that made service meaningful. "The loudest soldiers are often the most frightened," he had told her one evening as they walked the perimeter of their base. "Stars scattered across the desert sky like scattered dreams. True strength doesn't need to announce itself." Zura had fallen in love not with his reputation, but with his quiet integrity. The way he helped struggling recruits without making them feel inadequate. How he could disarm a situation with humor rather than force. His belief that their duty was to protect, not to dominate. During their 18 months together, Omar had shaped not just her tactical skills but her entire approach to service. He taught her that precision came from patience, that real courage meant doing what was right rather than what was impressive. "Promise me something," he had said during their last night together before his final deployment. They lay together in the small quarters they shared, her head resting on his chest as he traced patterns on her shoulder. "If something happens to me, don't let it change who you are. Don't let anger make you reckless or grief make you cruel." She had promised, not knowing how soon those words would be tested. The news came through official channels 3 weeks later. Lieutenant Colonel Omar Faisal, killed in action during a classified operation. No details, no explanation beyond the simple, devastating fact of his absence. The memorial service. Senior officers spoke of his tactical brilliance, his leadership, his sacrifice. They painted him as a warrior, a hero of legends. But Zura remembered the man who had taught her that true strength was gentle, that real courage was quiet, and that love meant carrying someone's best lessons forward even when they could no longer teach them themselves. She had resigned her commission that same week, unable to imagine serving without the anchor of his presence. But his lessons remained, embedded in muscle memory and heart memory alike. Every careful movement, every measured response, every moment of restraint carried his voice forward. Now, returning to training after 3 years of civilian life, she wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. She was simply honoring the man who had taught her that service was sacred, that discipline was a form of love, and that the best soldiers were those who never forgot they were human first. The burden of memory. Their apartment in downtown Amman felt like a sanctuary and a prison all at once. For 3 years, Zura had built a life carefully constructed around avoiding anything that might remind her too sharply of what she had lost. She worked as a security consultant for private companies, using her skills in ways that felt safe, contained, distant from the world where Omar had lived and died. Her days followed precise routines. Morning runs through quiet neighborhoods where the sound of her footsteps echoed off empty streets. Work that challenged her mind but never her heart. Evenings spent reading, cooking elaborate meals for one, maintaining the small rituals that kept grief manageable. But late at night, when sleep eluded her, she would find herself practicing the techniques Omar had taught her. Moving through their shared apartment with the silent precision he had insisted was essential. Her hands would remember the weight of weapons she no longer carried. Her body would flow through defensive patterns they had rehearsed together. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in March. Zura was watching the news when a report flashed across the screen about a terrorist attack that had been prevented by rapid response forces. The anchor mentioned the elite training academy where such operatives were prepared, the same facility where she and Omar had honed their skills. Sources confirmed that the successful operation was credited to techniques developed by the late Lieutenant Colonel Omar Faisal, whose innovative training methods continue to save lives 3 years after his death. The remote control slipped from her fingers. Omar's legacy lived on in ways she had never imagined, his teachings spreading through new generations of operatives who would never know his name. Meanwhile, she sat in comfortable exile, honoring his memory through solitude rather than service. That night, she pulled out the box she had kept hidden in her bedroom closet. Omar's personal effects, returned after his death, had remained untouched for 3 years. Now she opened it with trembling hands, finding his training journals filled with meticulous notes, tactical observations, and scattered personal thoughts. On the final page of his last journal, written just days before his deployment, she found words that stopped her heart. "Zura's precision under pressure exceeds even my expectations. She has the instincts of a born protector. If something happens to me, I hope she continues serving. The world needs soldiers who fight with both skill and conscience." The decision crystallized slowly over the following weeks. Not a dramatic revelation, but a quiet understanding that withdrawing from service hadn't honored Omar's memory, it had denied it. He would never have wanted her to carry guilt or hide her abilities. He had believed in duty, in using one's gifts to protect others, in the sacred responsibility of those with the skills to serve. Applying to return to active training felt like stepping back into a world she had abandoned. The physical requirements, psychological evaluations, and paperwork created a bridge between her civilian life and the person she had been before. Grief reshaped her completely. The night before reporting to the academy, Zura stood in her empty apartment, most of her belongings already packed away. She wore Omar's dog tags beneath her civilian clothes, feeling their familiar weight against her chest. "I'm ready now," she whispered to the silence. "I'm ready to carry your lessons forward." Trial by fire. The evaluation scenario began at 0400 hours with sirens that jolted the recruits from sleep. Emergency lighting bathed the dormitory in harsh red as Instructor Mansour's voice crackled through speakers. "Hostage situation. Unknown number of civilians trapped. Multiple armed suspects. You have 30 minutes to plan and execute a rescue operation. Chaos erupted immediately. Tariq began shouting orders, assuming command through volume rather than authority. Layla grabbed tactical charts, spreading them across a table while other recruits argued over weapon assignments and entry strategies. The noise level rose as stress amplified every personality trait, turning the group into a collection of competing egos rather than a cohesive unit. Zara stood at the edge of the activity, watching, listening, absorbing information without adding to the cacophony. She studied the mock facility blueprint with quiet intensity, her mind automatically calculating angles, timing, risk factors. When Tariq demanded her opinion on his aggressive frontal assault plan, she simply nodded and said, "I'll take whatever position you assign." Her apparent passivity frustrated several team members. During the equipment check, Layla snapped, "Are you even paying attention? This isn't a training drill. Our evaluations depend on this performance." "I understand," Zura replied calmly, checking her gear with the same methodical precision that had marked every action during her weeks at the academy. The scenario facility was a maze of rooms, corridors, and obstacles designed to test every skill they had learned. Hidden cameras recorded their every movement while instructors monitored from a control room, evaluating decision-making under pressure. Tariq's plan unraveled within minutes. His aggressive approach triggered multiple casualties among the hostages. Layla's alternative strategy resulted in 2 team members being killed by hidden defenders. As the exercise deteriorated, voices grew louder, coordination broke down, and panic began to set in. That's when Zara stepped forward. Not with dramatic gestures or shouted commands, but with quiet words and precise actions. She touched Tariq's shoulder, spoke low enough that he had to stop yelling to hear her, and suggested a flanking maneuver that would minimize exposure while maximizing coverage. Her movements through the facility were like watching a different species of soldier. Where others rushed, she flowed. Where they announced themselves with heavy footsteps and equipment noise, she became nearly invisible. Her weapon handling was surgical, never a wasted motion, never uncertainty about positioning or timing. In the control room, Instructor Mansour leaned forward, studying the monitors with growing amazement. The woman's tactical approach seemed familiar, as if he was watching echoes of training he remembered but couldn't quite place. When Zara encountered the first hostage-taker, her response was textbook perfect and somehow more than that. She created angles of approach that eliminated risk to civilians, used psychological tactics to confuse and isolate the target, and neutralized the threat with minimal force. Her teammates, who had been struggling individually, began responding to her calm presence like instruments finding their proper pitch. The final phase required extracting civilians under fire while maintaining defensive positions. Zura coordinated the evacuation with whispered commands and hand signals, her team moving now like a synchronized unit. She took the most dangerous position herself, providing cover while others shepherded the hostages to safety. When the exercise ended, the facility fell into profound silence. Even the simulated gunfire had stopped. The instructors' voices over the comm system seemed subdued as they called all personnel to debrief. Zura began cleaning her weapon immediately, her movements still precise and unhurried. Around her, teammates stared with new respect and growing curiosity. The woman who had seemed too careful, too quiet, had just delivered a masterclass in tactical operations under extreme pressure. In the control room, Instructor Mansour rewound the footage, studying specific moments with growing recognition and a strange sense of dread. Recognition and revelation. The debriefing room felt different now. Where casual conversations and joking had filled previous sessions, a respectful quiet dominated as recruits filed in. Zura took her usual seat near the back, but the invisible barrier that had separated her from the group had dissolved. Teammates who had mocked her caution now sought eye contact, nodding with newfound respect. Instructor Mansour entered carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that mixed professional assessment with personal confusion. He had spent the last 2 hours reviewing footage, cross-referencing tactical manuals, and making phone calls to former colleagues. "That was exceptional work," he began, his usual gruff demeanor softened by genuine admiration. The coordination, timing, and tactical thinking displayed during the final phase exceeded academy standards. His eyes found Zara in the back row. "Al-Rashid, your performance was particularly noteworthy." She nodded acknowledgement but remained silent, the same quiet dignity that had marked her weeks at the academy. "Your approach to room clearing, hostage protection, and team coordination. Mansour paused, studying his notes. Those techniques aren't standard curriculum. Where did you learn them? For the first time since arriving at the academy, Zura hesitated. The careful composure that had become her armor wavered slightly. Previous service, sir. Previous service with whom? The question carried weight beyond simple curiosity. Mansour's voice had dropped to the tone instructors used when they suspected something significant. Special reconnaissance. 3 years ago. Mansour set down his tablet, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching recognition. Unit designation. 7th Desert Hawks, sir. The tablet clattered as it hit the floor. Around the room, recruits exchanged puzzled glances as their instructor's face went pale. Mansour stared at Zara as if seeing her for the first time, pieces of a puzzle falling into place with devastating clarity. Omar Faisal, he whispered. The name hung in the air like a prayer and a wound. Zura's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, tears filling her eyes as she nodded. Lieutenant Colonel Faisal was your training officer. It wasn't a question. He was everything, she replied simply. Mansour moved slowly to the front row and sat down heavily, the authority dynamic forgotten. Omar trained me 15 years ago. Everything I know about tactical precision, about leading without ego, about protecting rather than conquering, he taught me that. His voice carried reverence and loss. I've been trying to honor his methods ever since he died. The room remained absolutely silent as two people connected by shared love for the same extraordinary man recognized each other across years of grief. When I watched you today, Mansour continued, I was seeing echoes of the best soldier I ever knew. But I thought I was imagining it. He looked directly at Zara now. You weren't just trained by him. You carry him forward. Zara wiped her eyes, finding her voice again. He taught me that service is sacred. That strength should be gentle. That the best soldiers never stop being human first. She looked around the room at her fellow recruits, all listening intently. I came back here to honor that teaching. Mansour stood slowly, extending his hand. It would be an honor to continue your training, Lieutenant. As Zara shook his hand, accepting both recognition and acceptance, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not the healing of grief, that would take much longer, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that love could survive loss, that the best parts of someone could live on through those they had touched. Omar's lessons would continue spreading through new generations of protectors, carried forward by hearts that remembered why they served.